Number 3. Nicolas Cocaign. Nicolas Cocaign was born in 1971 in Rouen, France. His 21-year-old mother, who had mental illness and was unhoused, gave him up for adoption a few weeks after his birth. He was adopted around the age of 3 or 4. Cocaign said that his adoptive parents, who worked for the Postal Service, were good people. In school, Cocaign had behavioral problems and was often disruptive in class. He was held behind several times. He eventually dropped out. His highest level of education is the 5th grade. When Cocaign was 6 years old, he started seeing a psychiatrist. He continued to see the psychiatrist into his teenage years. She said he had problems understanding the differences between right and wrong. At age 13, Cocaign was away at a summer camp. While at camp, he was allegedly raped. His behavioral problems only got worse from there. He started stealing and doing drugs. He also started running away from home. He also developed sexually violent and cannibalistic urges. Cocaign's parents said that he was at his best when he was working with horses. He worked as a groomer and caretaker at an equestrian center. His parents knew he was dangerous and tried to get him hospitalized several times. In 1995, Cocaign held his parents hostage and extorted money from them. In 1997, Cocaign was in police custody after robbing a post office. He was then transferred to a psychiatric hospital where he was held. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia. For the next few years, he was hospitalized several times. He never followed up with treatment and did not take his medication. In 2002, Cocaign robbed a bank and a post office, and he was sentenced to 5 years of prison. Because of time served before his conviction, he was scheduled to be released in 2005. His parents were scared about him getting released. The prison staff was also not happy about his impending release. Staff had heard him talk about his, quote, plans of rape, torture, and barbarity, unquote. So Cocaign was placed in a mental health institute. He remained there for 2 months and then he was released. He was unhoused upon his release. On March 26, 2006, Nicolas Cocaign met a woman and told her that God led her to him. He believed that he had met a saint. They went to a hotel room and talked most of the night. He then tried to rape the woman at gunpoint. The woman was able to escape. Cocaign was arrested several weeks later. 34-year-old Nicolas Cocaign was placed in the Bonne Nouvelle Remand Center in Rouen. Months later, in early 2007, Cocaign was in a 118-square-foot cell with 2 other men, Thierry Baudry and David Legreux. Legreux and Cocaign were having problems with 31-year-old Baudry. Baudry came from a problematic family life. When he entered jail, one of his brothers was already there. 9 years earlier, another one of his brothers took his life while in jail. Baudry was illiterate. He was in the remand center waiting trial for sexual assault. Cocaign and Legreux were having problems because Baudry had poor hygiene and wasn't being respectful. For example, he would use the toilet when they were eating. He also didn't wash his hands after using the toilet. On the night of January 2, 2007, Baudry once again clogged the toilet because he used too much toilet paper. The next morning at roll call, Nicolas Cocaign and David Legreux got out of their beds. 31-year-old Thierry Baudry was on the top bunk and didn't move. Cocaign told the correctional officer he would not move because he had killed him. Correctional officers got into the cell and they found a gory mess. Cocaign told them what had happened. He said that hours after Baudry clogged the toilet, Baudry gave him a dirty look. Cocaign realized that Baudry would always be a problem. Then he was struck by a homicidal urge he described as, quote, inner pleasure identical to sexual pleasure, unquote. He then attacked Baudry by punching, kneeing, and kicking him. He then stabbed him 10 times with a pair of scissors. To make sure he was dead, he put a plastic bag over his head for 5 minutes. Cocaign then decided to satisfy his cannibalistic curiosity. He used a razor to cut open the torso. He wanted to eat the heart. Instead, he pulled out part of the lungs and rib muscles. He ate some of it raw. He then cooked the rest on a stove with garlic, rice, and shallots. Other reports say he cooked it with onions. Some reports say that it was a camping stove, and others say it was a makeshift stove. Regardless, he cooked and ate the meat. The third cellmate, David Legreux, knew what was happening and was terrified. He pretended to be asleep the entire time. Cocaign was charged with murder. Cocaign's former girlfriend was not surprised he had eaten someone. He had often talked about his cannibalistic fantasies. She was just surprised he had eaten a man and not a woman. In November 2009, nearly 3 years after the horrifying murder, David Legreux took his own life in prison. It's believed that what he experienced that night in the cell severely haunted him and contributed to his decision. Nicolas Cocaign went to trial for murder in June 2010. His lawyer argued that he was not guilty by reason of insanity. Cocaign admitted he was guilty, but he was not remorseful for what he did. He said it was not a nice thing to do, but there was no way to reverse his actions. He also said he had previously asked for help with his mental health, but he did not get any help. He said, quote, nobody listened to me. I made calls for help, saying I was a dangerous man. I took action, and they took me seriously, unquote. Cocaign said he wanted to eat Baudry's heart because he wanted to consume his soul. The trial lasted 3 days. Nicolas Cocaign was found criminally responsible for the murder, and he was sentenced to 30 years in prison with a chance of parole after 20 years. In February 2011, he was sentenced to an additional 10 to 12 years for the attempted rape. It's unclear if that sentence was to run concurrently or consecutively with the sentence he received for murder. If it runs concurrently, he could be paroled in 2030 or earlier based on time served before his sentence. If he is paroled in 2030, he'll be about 59 years old. As for what he thought about the taste of human meat, Nicolas Cocaign told a psychiatrist, quote, what is terrible is that it is good. It tastes like venison. It's tender, unquote. Number 2. Armin Meiwes. Armin Meiwes was born in December 1961 in Essen, Germany. Essen is the German word for eat. His mother was 19 years older than his father. She had been married twice before and had 2 sons. His mother was cold and domineering, while his father was stern. The family lived in a rundown mansion in a wooded area outside Rothenburg, Germany, in a small town called Westfield. When Meiwes was 7, his father left the family, and Meiwes never saw him again. Shortly afterward, his 2 half-brothers went to live with their biological fathers. Meiwes' mother did not let him play with other children. She also made him wear lederhosen to school, and the other children made fun of him. He was considered an outcast. Meiwes was desperately lonely. He made up an imaginary brother he called Frankie. When he was 12, he developed cannibalistic fantasies. He believed that if he ate someone, they would never leave him. He was also obsessed with the story of Hansel and Gretel by the brothers Grimm. The story takes place in the same state where Meiwes lived. Meiwes most identified with the witch and fantasized about eating Hansel. He was also a big fan of the American television show Flipper. He fantasized about eating one of the teen boys who was a character. When Meiwes was a teenager, he would smear ketchup on himself. Sometimes he included pieces of pork with the ketchup. He did this because he thought it looked like he had been dismembered. When Meiwes was a teenager, his mother's overbearing attitude became even more intense. She would do things like accompany him on dates. She often had him work around the house while she supervised and berated him. Meiwes often fantasized about killing his mother. People who lived in the area thought that their mansion was haunted. They also compared Meiwes to Norman Bates, the main character in Robert Bloch's novel Psycho, which was adapted into the 1960 movie Psycho, directed by Alfred Hitchcock. In his 20s and 30s, Meiwes dated a little bit. But two things usually happen. Meiwes came across as too eager and talked about having children too early in the relationship, and this scared the women off. Or his mother would drive them away. Meiwes also considered himself bisexual. He was more attracted to men than women. From 1981 to 1993, Armin Meiwes served in the army. He was eventually put in charge of a unit of 12 men. But he failed to make friends in the army, and he was still very lonely. His mother often visited him on base, and many of the other soldiers thought that this was strange. They also made fun of him for her visits. Meiwes had problems with alcohol. In December 1986, he crashed his car while driving drunk, and his license was suspended for 9 months. Shortly after his license was reinstated, he crashed his car again while driving drunk. The two crashes limited his career in the army. So in 1991, he was discharged. After leaving the army, Meiwes trained to be a computer technician. He got a job with a software firm that serviced a bank's computers. He was highly respected at his job. In 1999, Meiwes' mother died at about age 80. Meiwes, who was 36, was left to live alone in the mansion in the woods. His neighbors thought he was weird, but harmless. He was always clean, impeccably dressed, polite, and helped out neighbors when he could. He even dressed up as Santa Claus for the town's Christmas festivities. Many people had him babysit for them. He seemed to interact better with children than adults. He also had childlike obsessions. For example, he collected Donald Duck comic books and Walt Disney movies. He also loved Star Trek. He watched all the series and movies and read many of the franchise's books. He also got heavily into internet pornography, especially extreme pornography. He had a fondness for torture. Another fascination of Meiwes were cannibal killers like Albert Fish and Jeffrey Dahmer. He also seemingly kept a shrine to his mother in her former bedroom. Supposedly, he kept a mannequin in the bedroom. He even wore her dresses and pretended to be his mother. Besides his mother's former bedroom and a small living quarter, Meiwes let the rest of the mansion fall into disrepair. Eventually, Meiwes discovered there were people on the internet who were also obsessed with cannibalism. Some people wanted to eat other people, and others wanted to be eaten. He was soon obsessed and spent many nights exploring websites dedicated to cannibalism. He also started a chat room about cannibalism. It grew to have 800 members. Meiwes used the name Frankie as his online name. Meiwes then decided he wanted to indulge in his decades-long desire to eat human flesh. Meiwes believed that if he ate someone, they would become part of him forever, and he'd never be lonely. So the person he ate had to volunteer. He then set up what he called a slaughter room. It had a table and meat hooks. On cannibal websites, he posted the ad quote, "I am Frankie from Germany, and I search for a young boy between 18 and 30 years old, have a normal built body, and you will die. Then come to me, and I butchering you, and eat your horny flesh," unquote. He received an overwhelming amount of responses. Between May 2001 and August 2001, he exchanged emails with over 400 people from Europe and the United States. He narrowed it down to 30 people whom he invited to visit him. He found that most of the men were just into role-playing and did not want to follow through. He also rejected one man because he was overweight and not very talkative. He told the man he wanted lean meat. Meiwes also believed that whoever he ate would become part of him, so he wanted someone with whom he could talk to. Then, on February 5, 2001, Meiwes received an email that reads, quote, "I offer myself to you and will let you dine from my live body. Not butchery, dining," unquote. The writer signed off the email, quote, "Devote a pig for slaughter," unquote. The author of the email was Bernd Jürgen Brandes. Brandes was a 43-year-old microchip engineer who lived in Berlin, Germany. Brandes' parents were both doctors. When he was 5, his mother took her own life. Brandes' father eventually got remarried, and he did not get along with his stepmother. Brandes got a degree in electrical engineering. He went to work at Siemens, a technology company, and was a division chief by the time he was 34. He had dated women and then had a relationship with a man. He found himself getting turned on by being tortured. But his strongest urge was that he wanted to be eaten. Meiwes quickly realized that Brandes was not into roleplay and he really wanted to be eaten. In their last email exchange, Brandes gave his consent and even gave Meiwes advice on how to dispose of inedible parts of the body so he wouldn't draw the attention of the police. Before leaving Berlin, Brandes covered his tracks to protect Meiwes, including purging his computers of information. On March 9, 2001, Brandes used cash to buy a one-way train ticket to a station close to Meiwes' home. Meiwes met him at the train station. They bought cough syrup that would make Brandes drowsy, along with some sleeping pills. Brandes then consumed a lot of medication. Brandes wanted Meiwes to bite his penis off. Meiwes was unable to do so, and Brandes became frustrated. He demanded to be taken back to the train station. Meiwes did as he was told, and they returned to the train station. Brandes bought a ticket to Berlin, but then he had a change of heart. They went back to Meiwes' home and hatched a new plan. Meiwes cut off Brandes' penis with a knife. They tried to eat it raw, but were unable to. As Brandes lay bleeding in a bed, Meiwes cooked the meat. They tried to eat it, but Meiwes had burned it, and it was too tough. Meiwes then fed it to his dog. Then they went into the bathroom, where Brandes soaked in the tub. Brandes asked Meiwes to slit his throat after he lost consciousness. Meiwes decided to give him privacy and went to his childhood bedroom and read a Star Trek novel. He periodically checked in on Brandes. After several hours, Brandes was still conscious. Brandes asked Meiwes to put him out of his misery. Brandes said, quote, "You have no idea how glad I am about this. It's the most pleasure I've ever had. It's what I've always wanted," unquote. Meiwes then moved Brandes to the slaughter room and got him on the table. He then slit his throat with a butcher knife. Afterward, he put the body on meat hooks and butchered the body. He put the meat in freezer bags. He ran some parts through a meat grinder. Altogether, he got about 60 pounds of meat. He put the meat in his freezer under a false bottom made from pizza boxes. He buried his head and other remains in his yard. Over the next 10 months, Meiwes ate Brandes. He then went back on the internet to find someone else to eat. More people reached out to him, and several men visited him. He also traveled to meet men and interview them, but none of the men were serious about being eaten. Then, in the summer of 2002, a medical student came across one of his ads. He communicated with Meiwes over email and realized that Meiwes had killed a man and was looking for someone else to kill. The police followed up on the lead months later in December 2002. Meiwes' property was searched. They found the remains of Brandis in the freezer and buried in the yard. They also found a video. Meiwes had recorded a lot of Brandis' death, including the castration and him slitting his throat on the table. In the video, it's clear that Brandis was still breathing when Meiwes slit his throat. They also found his correspondence with Brandis and others who had communicated with him. 7 months later, Meiwes was charged with murder. 42-year-old Armin Meiwes went to trial in December 2003. The prosecution had a strong case. They had a video of Meiwes cutting off Brandis' penis and slitting his throat, and his remains were found in his freezer and buried on his property. Meiwes also admitted to killing Brandis and eating him. He had eaten about 44 pounds. He said, quote, "With every piece of flesh I ate, I remembered him. It was like taking communion," unquote. The prosecution argued that Meiwes killed Brandis in a sexually motivated homicide. Meiwes' lawyer argued that Meiwes was guilty of murder on demand, which is helping someone euthanize themselves. This was a big difference in terms of sentencing. If Meiwes was convicted of murder, it was life in prison, whereas murder on demand had a maximum sentence of 5 years. Meiwes said, quote, "Byrne came to me of his own free will to end his life. For him, it was a nice death," unquote. Meiwes also said he regretted the killing. He said, quote, "I had my big hick, and I don't need to do it again. I regret it all very much, but I can't undo it," unquote. One thing that was agreed upon was that while Meiwes had several personality disorders, he knew what he was doing and he was in full control of his faculties when he killed Brandis. So there was no way he could be found not guilty by reason of insanity and committed to a psychiatric hospital. The trial lasted 2 months. Armin Meiwes was not found guilty of murder on demand or intentional murder. Instead, the panel of 3 judges found Meiwes guilty of manslaughter. He was then sentenced to 8.5 years of prison. The prosecution and many people in the public were upset with the sentence. It was appealed, and Germany's highest court reviewed the case. In April 2005, they ordered Meiwes to be retried. The court said that the sentence was too lenient. Also, they argued that Meiwes recording the murder was evidence that it was a sexually motivated murder. Armin Meiwes went to trial again in January 2006. The prosecution and the defense cases were very similar to the cases they presented in the first trial. This time, the prosecution had a psychiatric expert testify. He said that Meiwes would be a danger if he was released. This time, 44-year-old Armin Meiwes was found guilty of murder. He was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years. Based on time served, this would have made him eligible for parole around 2019. In 2020, Meiwes was allowed to leave the prison on supervised visits in a different city. He wore a disguise on his trips out of the prison. In a 2007 documentary, Interview with a Cannibal, Meiwes talks about the taste of meat. He said the first meal he ate was a rump steak from Brandis' back, and he cooked it with garlic. He wore a suit and used his fine china. He ate the meat with a side of Brussels sprouts and a South African wine. Meiwes said, quote, "The first bite was, of course, very strange. It was a feeling I can't really describe. I'd spent over 40 years longing for it, dreaming about it, and now I was getting the feeling that it was actually achieving the perfect interconnection through his flesh. The flesh tastes like pork, but stronger, unquote. At the time of this video, Armin Meiwes is 62 years old, and it's believed he's still incarcerated. Number 1. Nicolas Claux. On October 7, 1994, the police were called to the apartment of 34-year-old Thierry Bizigny. Bizigny was a restaurateur and classical musician. His parents had not heard from him in 3 days. They went to his apartment and found his dead body on the inside of the door. Bizigny had been shot to death 3 days earlier. He had been shot 4 times in the head and once in the back with a .22 caliber handgun. His skull had also been crushed with a pot plant. There were no signs of a break-in or forced entry. There were also no signs of a struggle. It appeared that a guest of Bizigny had shot him to death, grabbed a few items, and left. His checkbook, wallet with credit card, driver's license, alarm clock, and answering machine were stolen. Although Bizigny had been robbed, the police did not get the sense that the motive of the murder was robbery. But who would want to kill the 34-year-old man? Bizigny was a gay man, and at the time, there had been a spat of gay men murdered in Paris. In the past several weeks leading up to Bizigny's murder, 7 gay men had been shot to death with a .22 caliber handgun. They were killed near the front door of their homes. With the bodies, the other victims had been sexually mutilated or violated in some way. Their homes had also been ransacked. So the police thought that Bizigny was possibly a copycat killing. A short time later, the police got a lead in Bizigny's murder. A man had tried to buy a VCR with a check belonging to Thierry Bizigny. The man gave him Bizigny's driver's license as proof he was Bizigny. The clerk noted that the picture on the license was of the man standing before him. But then the clerk noted that the man's signature did not match the one on the ID. He then saw that the driver's license had been tampered with. Another photo had been poorly placed over the original photograph. The shop assistant called the police. The man ran from the store. The police believe that the man killed Bizigny. The police collected the driver's license with the killer's photograph. The photograph was sent out to members of the police department. 6 weeks after the murder, on November 15, 1994, the police were called to the world-famous Moulin Rouge. A man had been harassing a woman in front of the cabaret. The responding officer recognized the man as the one who was wanted for the murder of 34-year-old Thierry Bizigny. The man was arrested. He was identified as 22-year-old Nicolas Claux, who also went by Nico. The police got a search warrant for his apartment. What they found shocked them. Human bones, teeth, bags of blood, and human ash were found throughout his apartment. Under the bed, they found a .22 caliber handgun. Ballistic testing was done, and it was determined that was the murder weapon. The police confronted Claux with the results of the ballistic testing and what they had found in his home. Claux then told the police about his bizarre life. Nicolas Claux was born in March 1972 in the African country of Cameroon. His parents were both French. His father worked in international financing for a bank, so they were in Cameroon for his job. Claux was an only child. From ages 5 to 7, the family lived in London, England. When he was 7, his family moved to Paris. He said his parents gave him everything he wanted in terms of material items, but they were cold and distant. One day when Claux was 10, he asked his maternal grandfather to play tennis with him, but his grandfather resisted. Claux was finally able to convince him to play. But as soon as they started playing, his grandfather suddenly dropped dead. He was killed by a cerebral hemorrhage. Claux's mother believed that he had killed his grandfather with supernatural powers. The tragedy kickstarted Claux's fascination with death. He became obsessed with the supernatural and the occult. He also started torturing animals. From ages 12 to 16, Claux's family lived in Portugal. Claux felt isolated because he didn't speak Portuguese. Also because his family moved around so much, Claux was a bit of a loner. When he was 16, they returned to Paris. Back in Paris, he started exploring cemeteries. He then started to break into crypts where he would steal bones, teeth, and ash. On one occasion, he broke into a crypt and opened a coffin. He stabbed the corpse a dozen times with a screwdriver and took a Polaroid picture of the body. When he was 20, he enlisted in the army and trained as a gunsmith. But he didn't like the army and resigned. In 1993, when Claux was 21, he applied to a school to study to be a mortician, but he was not accepted. He was able to get a job at a morgue in a children's hospital. The first autopsy he assisted in was of a 10-year-old girl. He worked there for several months. Then, in December 1993, he got a job at the morgue at a general hospital. He assisted in autopsies, and he had to transport blood from the hospital's blood bank to operating rooms. He said he would steal unused bags of blood. He then took them home and mixed the blood with protein powder or human ash and drank it. He also claims that the morgue attendants did most of the autopsies. The pathologist only dissected organs, so he was often left alone with bodies. He claims that he started to have sex with dead bodies. He also started to cut meat off and take it home, where he would eat it. He said the first flesh he took was from an 11-year-old girl. The police asked Claux how he felt after he ate human flesh for the first time, and he said, quote, "To be honest, I said to myself, wow, now I'm a cannibal, cool," unquote. Claux said that he murdered Thierry Bizigny simply because he wanted to kill someone. He heard about the murders of the gay men and thought if he killed a gay man, the police would assume it was the work of the serial killer. He also knew that gay men met on Minitel. Minitel was a French-designed open computer network that was popular in France before the World Wide Web became commonplace. Claux contacted Bizigny, and Bizigny invited him over to his apartment. Claux said that he went there with a gun. Bizigny let him in. After Bizigny closed the door, Claux shot him in the face, and then he fell face first to the floor. Claux then explored the apartment. When he came back to Bizigny, he was struggling to breathe. He shot him 3 more times, including in the back of the head. But Bizigny still wasn't dead. Claux said that he went to the kitchen and grabbed some cookies. He then went back to where Bizigny was bleeding to death. Claux said that he sat down and ate cookies while he watched Bizigny die, but it was taking too long. So when he finished his cookies, he shot him in the back. He then picked up the pot plant and smashed it on his head. He then stole the items and left. Claux said he didn't feel bad about killing Bizigny. He compared it to killing an insect. Claux was held in jail for 2 years while he awaited trial. Psychiatrists examined him. They said he was a nearly psychotic sadist. Nicolas Claux went to trial in May 1997. He pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. The trial lasted for 3 days. After 3 hours of deliberation, he was found responsible for the murder. Claux was sentenced to 12 years in prison. In prison, Claux studied computer programming and began painting. Nicolas Claux was released from prison in March 2002 after serving 7 years and 4 months. After Claux was released, he exploited his notoriety by starting a website, vampireofparis.com. On his website, he sold his artwork, which was often grotesque images. He also did portraits of famous killers like Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer. Claux also provided the illustrations for controversial true crime writer Sandra London's 2004 book, True Vampires. He has made several media appearances and has spoken at goth and vampire conventions. He calls himself a reformed vampire. Claux has also written several books, including a cookbook for human flesh called The Cannibals Cookbook 2, More Ways to Have Your Friends and Foes for Dinner. Claux has spoken and written extensively about what he thinks of human meat. He said that he talked to a butcher and learned that the meat is better when the animal has been dead for 3 or 4 days. He said that the muscles and thighs are the best. He did not like breast meat because it was all fat. On his website, he created a page called Cooking with Nico. On it, he gives recommendations on how to cook human meat. He recommends using the quadriceps. He says that buttocks can be good, but there's a lot of fat in them. However, if the person is athletic, then it can be very good. He said that the buttocks of an athletic female is one of his favorite meals. Claux says that he prefers females to males. This is why he didn't take home any of Thierry Bizigny's body to eat. He said he had killed Bizigny because he was an easy target. He said he had planned to kill women and Bizigny was just practice. He planned to keep on killing until the public and the police became too panicked, then he would move to another area and continue killing. Claux said that he was not big on seasoning when he cooked meat. He thought it took away from the natural flavoring. He prefers to eat the meat raw. He said the taste reminds him of tartare steak or carpaccio. However, if he did cook it, he liked barbecue sauce on it. He said a good side dish was beans. The murders of the other 7 gay men who were killed in Paris in the weeks before Thierry Bizigny are considered closed, but they have not been solved. Nicolas Claux was the prime suspect in the murders. There are several similarities between the murders of Bizigny and the other 7 murders. All the men were shot with a .22 caliber handgun just inside the door of their homes. Also, all the men had used Minitel. Claux was also seen at gay bars where the victims hung out. Claux also hung out at cemeteries at night. This was a common meeting place for gay men in Paris. Finally, the murder spree came to an end when Claux was arrested. However, no physical evidence has ever been found that connects Claux to the murders. At the time of this video, it's believed that 52-year-old Nicolas Claux is living in Paris, France. Thank you so much for watching today's video. We just want to remind you we started a channel membership where half the funds will go to solve a cold case. For more information, click on the video that's on the screen now. Well, that's all for today. Thanks again for watching.